Goodman. The United States and the European Union are warning Russia not to annex Crimea after voters there overwhelmingly backed a referendum to leave Ukraine and join Russia. Crimean authorities said 96.8% of voters in the Black Sea Peninsula supported the referendum, but many members of the ethnic Ukrainian and Muslim Tatar minorities in Crimea boycotted the poll. Earlier today, the Crimean parliament also voted in favor of the region joining Russia. The situation in Crimea has sparked the gravest crisis in East-West relations since the Cold War. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said the vote in Crimea will not be recognized by the international community.
The United States position on that referendum, I must say, is clear, and it's clear today. We believe the referendum is contrary to the Constitution of Ukraine, is contrary to international law, is in violation of that law, and we believe it is illegitimate. And as the President put it, illegal under the Ukrainian Constitution. Neither we nor the international community will recognize the results of this referendum. And we also remain deeply concerned about the large deployments of Russian forces in Crimea and along the eastern border with Russia.
On the eve of the vote, Russian forces seized a natural gas terminal in Ukraine just outside Crimea's regional border. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov defended the referendum vote in Crimea, saying there's a historical precedent for peoples and regions pursuing self-determination.
As far as statements by our Western partners on unacceptability of the referendum, I've already explained our view on the subject. We base our position on the fact that nobody canceled the right of people to self-determination. This right is one of the main principles of the United Nations Charter.
Tension is also rising in other parts of eastern Ukraine, which has seen a series of pro-Russian rallies. Earlier today, the Ukrainian parliament endorsed a presidential decree for a partial military mobilization to call up 40,000 reservists to counter Russia's military actions. It's also unclear what will happen to the Ukrainian military bases in Crimea. They've been surrounded for weeks by Russian forces. To talk more about the situation in Crimea, we're joined by Oliver Bullough from Crimea. He is Caucasus editor for the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. His book is called Let Our Fame Be Great, Journeys Among the Defiant People of the Caucasus. Nicholas Clayton is a freelance journalist who just left Crimea. He has covered the South Caucasus since 2009. And in Moscow, we're joined by Dmitry Trenin, director of the Carnegie Moscow Center, recently published an article in The Guardian titled, "The Crisis in Crimea Could Lead the World into a Second Cold War." Let's go first to Crimea itself. Oliver, can you talk about the vote? What took place? What was the atmosphere and the response right now with this overwhelming vote for secession from Ukraine to join Russia?
Well, the first thing about the vote is the result was never in any doubt. The only option essentially on the ballot paper was either when you had a choice to leave Ukraine or to join Russia. There was no option. So there was never any question that this would go one way. And it did indeed go that way. It went that way overwhelmingly, though personally I think possibly the results given are a little bit inflated. I can't believe that the turnout was as high as 83%, certainly considering the fact that all the Ukrainians who live in Crimea and all the Crimean Tatars who together make up more than 30% of the population boycotted the polls. So I think the results were inflated. But
can you explain, Oliver, what the question was? What was the vote? What were the questions that were asked, the choice?
Well, there were two choices. There wasn't a yes or no question like the ordinary referendum is. There were two choices. One was to join Russia, and the other was to return to the 1992 Constitution. Now, I'm personally not entirely sure what the 1992 Constitution consists of, and no one I talked to ever really seems to know, but that didn't matter, owing to the fact that only 3% of people voted for that option anyway. It was an overwhelming 97% in favour of joining Russia, and that's certainly what the government here has been pressing ahead with today. They've already passed a series of laws to move to the Moscow time zone, to adopt the ruble, to accept a lot of money from the Russian budget, which will double the budget, the amount of money available to the government here. So they're not wasting any time in Parliament. So it should be said the mood on the streets is rather subdued, I think, probably because there was such an enormous party last night that quite a lot of people have got a bit of a hangover this morning.
And what was the atmosphere in Crimea during the vote?
Well, it was people were turning up to the polling stations. People were casting their votes in a fairly orderly manner. But I mean, it got increasingly jolly as the day wore on, and it became obvious which way the vote was going to go. And people gathered on the central Lenin Square underneath the big towering statue of the founder of the Bolshevik state. And there was a rock concert, and people gathered, waved Russian flags, chanted Russia, 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 as if they were at a football match. It occurred to me about halfway through that it was like a combination of Russia winning the World Cup and the Nuremberg rally. It was a very peculiar atmosphere of sort of a degree of celebration, and also of a strange and slightly disquieting sense of triumphalism that I, as a non-Russian, found a little bit weird.
And the attitudes of the different populations, those who were boycotting, those who were voting, the attitude of the Russians in Crimea, and also the press.
Well, I've just been talking for quite a long time, talking to a Ukrainian lady. She was telling me that for her, for Orthodox Christians, they have three mothers. They have their own mother, they have their motherland, and they have the Virgin Mary. Her own mother died last year, and she said it felt for her like cancer. Cancer took away her own mother, and now cancer had taken away her motherland, and all that she had left to trust in was the Virgin Mary. That's what she told me. She was absolutely devastated by what had happened. The Crimean Tatars, who, as I say, they're a Muslim minority here, they're also very concerned, definitely on edge about the prospect of going to Russia. They feel that Ukraine has guaranteed their rights very well over the last 23 years, and they have no interest in joining Russia at all. However, the majority of the population here are Russians, and they're very happy about it, not least because they're going to move on to the Russian system of social security and social benefits, which means that pensions will at the minimum double. And so they're all already counting the money. I've spent a bit of time in a bank this morning, and there was a steady queue of people going in to ask the cashiers when exactly it was that the new Russian benefits would start arriving in their bank accounts.
Dmitry Trenin, you're in Moscow at the Moscow Carnegie Center. You've written a number of pieces for different publications. Your piece for Foreign Policy, Welcome to Cold War II, This is What It Will Look Like. Talk about this vote from your perch in Moscow right now. What is the attitude there?
Well, I think that the attitude of most people in Moscow is that the people of Crimea have been able to decide their fate, and they're joining Russia. There will be some sacrifice that the Russian people will have to pay for that, but it's certainly worth having, because what's been done is correcting the injustice committed about 70 years ago when Crimea was detached from the then Soviet Russian Republic and attached to the then Soviet Ukrainian Republic.
And from the attitude, the position of President Putin, if you could explain what he sees right now and what the Russian parliament will do.
Well, I think it's quite clear what the Russian parliament will do. The Russian parliament is paving the way for Crimea to become part of the Russian Federation, a republic within the Russian Federation. And they started working on that some time ago. They are pretty well advanced. There will be no delay. So I think that in terms of the Russian Constitution, everything will be done quickly so that Crimea becomes part of the Russian Federation. As I said, this is something that is widely supported by the bulk of the Russian population. Mr. Putin's approval rating has already very high. Last month, 61% has increased to about 71%. So the bulk of the people welcome Crimea's reintegration, reunification with Russia. This does not mean that a lot of people disagree. Part of the intelligentsia, the opposition, especially the non-systemic opposition, those who are not represented on the Duma, they staged a march in Moscow. Not a very numerous one, but a demonstration of rejection of this policy by President Putin. Now, I don't think that Putin pays too much attention to that. He sees himself on the right side of history. He sees himself correcting the injustices done at the end of the Cold War, at the end of the Soviet Union. He sees himself supported by the Russian people, and he is well prepared, I think, to take on his opponents both domestically and internationally.
8 U.S. senators concluded their trip to Ukraine Saturday after meeting with leaders of Ukraine's interim government. This is the group leader, Senator John McCain.
I don't believe there will be a reignition of the Cold War, but I do believe it's long overdue that we understand Vladimir Putin for who he is and what his ambitions are. This is the person that stated that the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century was the breakup of the Soviet Union. This is a person who wants to restore the near abroad. This is a person that occupies parts of the sovereign nation of Georgia, that occupies the Transnistria and Moldova, that has now acted in an act of naked aggression. And again, all of us are concerned about recent reports of additional military buildup in this area. And so we have to treat him for what he is. And that does not reignite the Cold War, but it means we enact steps that make it clear to Vladimir Putin that his ambitions will not be realized by the great community of nations that would resist it.
That's Senator John McCain, just back from Ukraine. Dmitry Trenin in Moscow at the Carnegie Moscow Center. Your response?
Well, I think that we can debate what constitutes a Cold War, what does not. In my view, a situation in which there is more competition than collaboration would be my explanation, or my explanation of what the Cold War is. I don't think that people will pay much attention. People here will pay much attention to what the senator has just said. I think they basically see him and so many others as being trying to hem Russia in, hold Russia down, and I don't believe that this is something new. However, I think that the policy of Putin will not aim at actually making the confrontation more than what it will necessarily be. I think that Putin's ambition, if you like, or Putin's next aim is to help Ukraine towards some kind of a federation, some kind of a system in which the southern and eastern portions of that country, mostly Russophone, enjoy a wide degree of linguistic, cultural, and economic autonomy, and that Ukraine itself, as a country, does not join NATO or the European Union, or become associated with the European Union. That, I think, is Mr. Putin's, call it ambition, call it plan, call it goal, but that's, I think, what he is aiming at.
Dmitry Trenin, I think that's something in the United States people don't exactly have a very informed concept about. Russia's attitude toward the expansion of NATO. Could you explain how Russia sees what has taken place over the last years?
Well, first of all, let me clarify that by Russia, I would mean primarily the Russian establishment, the Russian government, the Kremlin, and the establishment. I think that the establishment have seen NATO's enlargement, which began about two decades ago, as an attempt or as a project by the victorious powers in the Cold War, led by the United States, to consolidate their wins at the expense of Russia's security. They saw NATO coming closer to Russia's borders, and they saw their own bids, and there have been numerous bids by Russia to join NATO. They saw those bids rejected by essentially the United States. So having no chance to become part of the alliance, and having the alliance, which used to be the Soviet Union's adversary in the Cold War, coming closer and closer to Russia's borders, they certainly became very concerned. And I think that from the standpoint of Mr. Putin and his associates in the Kremlin, Ukraine is a red line, and anyone who ventured out there had to be met with some kind of a response, which is exactly what happened after the toppling of President Yanukovych, who was, someone who was neither with Russia nor fully with the West, but he was replaced by a virulently anti-Russian and notionally pro-Western bunch of people, and that, to Mr. Putin and his associates, was the West crossing the red line.
And the attitude of the United States when it came to what took place and Yanukovych being pushed out, calling that constitutional, but calling the referendum Crimea unconstitutional.
Well, I would say that the Russians have become used to people essentially using various standards for their own behavior and for other people's behavior. Basically, President Putin in his press conference recently intimated that he was doing the things that basically the United States was doing. He was placing the legitimate above the legal. If you need something and you need it badly, you go for it. It may not be legal, but if it's in your national interest, then you go for it. Except that the cases of Libya or Kosovo or Iraq arguably were less important for the United States' national security interests than the issue of Crimea and Ukraine is or was for Mr. Putin and the Kremlin.
We're talking to Dmitry Trenin in Moscow at the Carnegie Moscow Center, Oliver Bullough in Crimea with the Institute for War and Peace. And when we come back, we'll also be joined by Nicholas Clayton, a freelance journalist who just came from Crimea, is in Istanbul. This is Democracy Now! Stay with us.